Are real stories of 21st century people who've been exiled or otherwise become refugees from their home countries for different reasons. The purpose of these stories is that they help us find a modern day context to the story of the exile of the Israelites during the time that today's passage was written. It gives us a broader understanding of what it means to have a home that we love, to lose it for varying reasons, and leave for a foreign location and face the uncertainties that that kind of disruption and displacement brings. These stories help us see the very human need to seek God in search of ways to have our hope restored and to experience revival within our community. This first story comes from a man named Parvez Chowdhury, who is 48 years old at the time of his telling. He was from Lahore, Pakistan, but was exiled in Bangkok, Thailand. Here are Parvez's words. I'm a human rights lawyer. I have 3 master's degrees in history, Urdu, and political science. In Pakistan, I worked on laws that discriminate against minorities, especially the blasphemy law, which is mainly used against Christians. In 2009, I was nominated for the Human Rights Award by the European Union Bar Association. Working on human rights issues made me a high-profile figure in Pakistan, which is why I received death threats. In 2006, my car was hit by Muslim extremists and a passenger was killed. I sustained many injuries and remained in hospital for weeks. In September of 2010, mullahs declared outside the High Court that my family and I were blasphemers, working against Islam, and were liable to be killed. I was sure I'd be assassinated at any moment, so we left Pakistan on the 7th of April in 2011 with support from the European Union. Our main fear here in Thailand is arrest by the police after our visas expire. We want to live like free human beings, but like all refugees, we're afraid. We feel stateless. When my wife and my children ask about our future, I don't know what to tell them. I feel that later we can hope to start a new life in another country, whoever will take us. To live a life with a free mind is a necessity for every human being. And now, if you will, hear a story from a younger man. His name was Shafiq, from Kabul and living in New York. I was born in Kabul into a happy family. My mother was a doctor, and my father worked for the government. My brothers studied. When the Taliban came to our country, my family left for Pakistan as refugees, but I stayed to continue my studies. In 2001, my family came back. After I finished school, I was a translator for a U.S. company. Soon, I was receiving threats from local gangs for collaborating with the Americans. In 2003, my father, who worked as a state security minister, was killed by the Taliban. My mother died of a heart defect 6 months later. I was able to escape to Russia under the pretext that I was going to study. I left in January of 2006. I took a course in public administration and then entered the Rostov State Civil Engineering University. That summer, I visited Afghanistan, which is where Kabul is. But when I arrived in Kabul, I found out that my elder brother had been killed as revenge for my father's work. At this point, I realized that I'd never be able to see my town again. In 2008, I went to Russia for a second time. I finished university and applied to the International Organization for Migration in Moscow. Now I've been in New York for 1 year, and I feel like a part of it, like I'm living in my own country. I'm very happy here. The people are kind and helpful. I hope I can get a better job, that I'll be able to work in a good company, and that I'll have a good life. You're free here. To set the context for you, Today's passage, Psalm 85, was written by a special group of singers known as the Korahites, or the sons of Korah. Scholars believe that the psalm was composed shortly after the Babylonian exile. You might remember that the people of Israel had been exiled to Babylon after Israel was besieged by none other than King, wait for somebody to say his name, Nebuchadnezzar. The king of Judah at that time was King Jehoiakim. Now, Jehoiakim had refused to pay tribute to Nebuchadnezzar. After having paid him for 3 years, the 4th year, he decided he wasn't going to. So, Jehoiakim was killed because of that refusal. And his son became king, but his son was immediately deported to Babylon. Now, what they experienced actually wasn't a single mass deportation, but a series of several smaller deportations over the course of several years. Some of the Israelites remained in Judah while their highest leaders were deported. So this means the king, his court, teachers, prophets, other leaders. See, the land of Judah wasn't entirely destroyed. Oh, that's a check floating around. Thank you, Bobby. The land of Judah wasn't entirely destroyed, but the city of Jerusalem was utterly destroyed. So the temple and Israel's families were torn apart. Thank you, Jimmy. It wasn't until the Persians defeated the Babylonians roughly 80 years later that the exiled Judeans were allowed to begin the process of returning to their land. Some chose to return and some did not. See, several generations would have been born into the land of Babylon. So the land of Israel might, for them, have been something like a fairy tale. Why would they long to return to something that they had never known? So many of these children and grandchildren did not return to Judah. For those who did, the land was not what they remembered or imagined from the stories that they were told. And upon arriving back to their homeland, this dream seemed in many ways more like a nightmare. Because context is so important, and Psalm 85 is best understood in its fullness rather than the small passage that's our focal passage today, if you'll follow along with me, I'm going to read verses 1 through 13. Lord, you were favorable to your land. You restored the fortunes of Jacob. You forgave the iniquity of your people. You pardoned all their sin. You withdrew your wrath. You turned from your hot anger. Restore us again, O God of our salvation, and put away your indignation toward us. Will you be angry with us forever? Will you prolong your anger to all generations? Will you not revive us again so that your people may rejoice in you? Show us your steadfast love, O Lord, and grant us your salvation. Let me hear what God the Lord will speak. For he will speak peace to his people, to his faithful, to those who turn to him in their hearts. Surely his salvation is at hand for those who fear him, that his glory may dwell in our land. Steadfast love and faithfulness will meet. Righteousness and peace will kiss each other. Faithfulness will spring up from the ground, and righteousness will look down from the sky. The Lord will give what is good, and our land will yield its increase. Righteousness will go before him, and will make a path for his steps. Pray with me. Lord, thank you for ears to hear and for the promise that you will indeed speak peace to your faithful people. Show us the way now, Lord, to a restored hope in you and the path that you have designed for us here as the people of Heritage Baptist Church. Amen. As we reflect on these words and on the psalmist who wrote them, after hearing these first stories of exile and the psalmist's own return to a land that is perhaps now less hospitable, less friendly, or less wonderful than he or she may have imagined, we begin to feel some of the feelings that these Korahites felt as they developed and sang this song. I wish we could hear them, don't you? being sung just as they were meant to be sung. But our hearts do hear, I think. We have a distant understanding of how it feels to be far from home, in a sense. Here we are, a people seeking refuge in an outdoor pavilion to worship freely together. We've followed the Lord's guidance as His people to a place that might feel a bit like exile. The old trappings of home as we knew it are gone. Things are different, but it's really okay here. We know that this is where we've been led to this point. We also know that we have further to go. We've had friends along the way who have offered us options and encouragement. They may or may not understand how it is that we got here, but that's okay because we didn't get to this point by ourselves. Verse 8 says, "Let me hear what God the Lord will speak, for He will speak peace to His people." We got here because we're a people who listen to God for our direction. Why would we do the things that we've done? Why would we follow God in such an out-of-the-box kind of way? I think the psalmist knew why. This is the gospel in the Old Testament, remember? God's story with God's people, the things that God is, and the things that are eternally true. The good news is that God has already been favorable and restored us. Verse 1. Forgiven and pardoned us. Verse 2. Withdrawn His wrath. Verse 3. We know this from the Old Testament stories of God leading His people Israel, but we also know this through the story of God's plan of love through Jesus. We know that these things are ours because of what Jesus has accomplished on our behalf. But it doesn't take much discomfort to send us into our little pity parties. We forget about how God has met our needs and how God guided our steps when it is that we have to fight dirt doggers and bees and heat and sweat and smaller checking account totals. Restore us again, we beg God, verse 4. Are we being punished? Are you angry, we ask, verse 5. Won't you bring us back to life that we might praise you? Verse 6. Prove to us that you love us. Save us, Lord. Verse 7. But verse 8 is where it gets really good to see. Because here the psalmist does what happens so regularly in the Psalms. Here the psalmist shows us how to pivot. We learn how to change the way that we perceive our circumstance. Let me hear what God the Lord will speak. Let me stop listening to my own grumbling or the grumblings of my brothers and sisters around me. Because God will speak peace to His people, to His faithful, to those who turn to Him in their hearts. This is where we rely on what we know about God. Not what we know about our professional experiences or our own thoughts and feelings. No. We look at what we know about our God. This is a saving God. A God whose glory has dwelt among us. We've seen God's glory. We know what it means to have God with us. Then the image begins to take shape. And a good image is what a people who seek restoration and revival really need. This is how restoration looks. Steadfast love and faithfulness will meet. Righteousness and peace will kiss each other. Faithfulness will spring up from the ground, and righteousness will look down from the sky, it says. Do you hear that? We are surrounded by the goodness that is God. Steadfast love comes in from the left, and faithfulness comes in from the right. They meet right where we are. Righteousness looks over at peace, and they kiss each other right on the lips. Faithfulness springs up like life-giving water out of the ground, and righteousness looks from the sky and sees its own reflection. Folks, if this is not a portrait of our Jesus, I don't know what is. All of these attributes attributes of God don't just exist out in some distant holy body or holy land. These are the attributes that are embodied by our Jesus. And these are the attributes of God within a Spirit-led people. This is hope restored. We trust in God's goodness and the path that's laid out before us, even before we see it. This is our hope not just for today, but for eternity. This is where it's all headed. Our mission and our ministry is already restored because it isn't ours to begin with, it's God's. Our future is secure because it isn't ours to begin with, it's God's. The good news for us is that we get to participate with God in all that God is and all that God has in store for us. Dreaming of a future and hope is what exiles do. Parvez and Shafiq both left their homeland. Neither of them see any vision of returning to what they knew as home before. Home for them is what they're going to make of where they are. Otherwise, they're going to continue to move from place to place until they find a place where they feel a sense of safety and community, and that the thing that they both wistfully aspire to in their stories, freedom. For the people of God, after a time of placing our hopes and our dreams in false visions and false things like buildings and programs, ways of doing what pleases each other rather than pleasing God, God will move us to conviction. You ask any person who's been a church member for any number of years, and he or she is going to tell you that the church has changed and is now changing in ways that my generation and the one that preceded mine has never witnessed. God has convicted us toward drastic changes, but it's not for the purpose of sending us out to pasture. No. It's for the purpose of transforming us back into the church that He intended, to refine us into the spiritual body of Jesus, living and breathing and doing the work that we've been ordained to do in our families and in our communities, in our country, in our world. The path to our restoration and revival is paved with God's loyalty to His promises, with His faithfulness, His righteousness, and His peace. We are restored and revived, not because of who we are, but because of who God is. We are the church, not because of who we are or where we meet, but because of who God is and what God does in us and through us. As we live out our plan as a community of believers in Jesus this summer, we must hold tight to our own loyalty to God's promises and to the knowledge of God's faithfulness and our faithful response to God as our one and only beacon of light. We strive for righteousness and peace in all of our dealings with each other and with our neighbors and in all of our daily interactions. We will walk this path believing the glory that's set before us as we follow our God, with Jesus as our model and our way, and the Holy Spirit as our internal guide. We must choose to walk in this spirit of restoration and revival even before we see the place that we will settle in the fall and in the seasons beyond. This is the path to restored hope and to revival for the church today. Oh God, we are your people, and we know your voice. We know you because you revealed yourself to us in so many ways and at so many times. Help us not to be distracted or misguided by the competing voices that rise up to lead us in ways that are not your ways. Help us to remain quiet and humbly follow when your voice leads us in ways that contradict our own preferences or desires for comfort. Transform us. Help us to acknowledge you as our vision and our goal and our victory in all things. Make clear to each of us the vision of our future as your servants in this community of Wake Forest, North Carolina, and how we might impact those in our individual circles of influence each and every day as ambassadors of Jesus Christ. Revive us, our God. Restore us and renew us in ways that only you can imagine, and paint that image in our hearts and our minds as only you can. You are our God, and we are your people. Lead us and mold us into the church and the people you intended from the very beginning. We lift up our hearts and we rejoice in your presence with us, Lord, and we come in the name of Jesus Christ, who is the way, who is the truth, and who is the life. Amen. As we celebrate these truths, I want to invite you to pull up your music sheets for I Have a Hope.